Hello, World History students. Today is Unit 9, Part 1 of our World History class. We're talking today about industrialization, which is the process of developing machine production of goods. Really what this is the Industrial Revolution, revolutionizing the economy, revolutionizing society, and in fact, revolutionizing the whole globe, as you'll see here in just a moment. Our Industrial Revolution starts in England with the agricultural revolution, and there are two parts to this agricultural revolution that happened. One of them is the enclosure movement. You have to imagine that in the past there were a lot of different landowners, some of them having very small plots of land and some of them having much larger plots of land. And the larger landowners wanted to buy out the smaller landholders, enclose their fields with large fences or hedges, and then improve that land so that those lands became much more productive and produced a lot more food. They do this with fertilizer. They do this with some pretty simple farm machinery, and they do this also with the crop rotation system. When they buy out their smallholding neighbors, they are producing a class of people who don't have any land anymore. They're hanging out in the countryside and they have nothing really to do with their time, so they're looking for a job. They'll start to work eventually they'll work in factories, but they start to manufacture things like textiles in the countryside at first. But more about that in just a moment. These landless laborers, like I say, will eventually move on to the city and work in the factories. Crop rotation is something that is going on too, starting really in the late Middle Ages and continuing forward. It is basically improved farming techniques. One of them is rotating which fields get planted in the spring and which field gets planted in the fall, and then having a field that doesn't get planted on anymore at all so that it can have nutrients return to the soil and that will be productive. So this crop rotation is also part of the enclosure movement, plowing larger fields with these improved techniques. It means that the land is going to become more productive, it's more efficient, and it's producing more food. Well, more food means eventually more people as well. As food becomes cheaper, people who are working buy more food, they feel pretty comfortable in their lives, and they have larger families. So that's kind of the two things that are going on with enclosures and crop rotations. If you're looking for the EQ there, the enclosures are creating a class of landless laborers who will be able to work in industry, and the crop rotation is creating more food. So there are more people and also more laborers to work in industry. Why does this happen in England? Well, the English had factors of production. They had the land available, as you saw. They also have land that has raw materials underneath it that are essential for the Industrial Revolution, as we'll see here in just a moment. They have the labor force because these people were basically kicked off of their land, or they had their land bought out and now they're looking for jobs. And there's also capital. There is wealth that can be invested. Maybe some of that wealth is from those larger landowners who are making a lot of money off of their efficient lands. Or maybe it's people who are living in the Caribbean, overseas in North America, who are making a lot of money off of the slave trade or sugar plantations and so on. In any case, you had people who had money, they were looking to invest it. As I said, those natural resources that Britain had, the land part, would be things like water power. You might know that Edina started out with a mill, a water mill, the sort of water wheel that is turning. And generally what happens is those water wheels can grind grains into flour, but you can also harness them to machinery, and they can power machinery as well. Well, Britain had a lot of water that you could do that with. They also had, and you can see this on the map, a lot of coal. And coal is a kind of a a stone-like material that burns if you have never encountered coal before, and it can be used in the new steam engine, as we'll talk about here in just a little bit. There's also iron ore, which is also a rock-like or stone-like substance that can be turned eventually into iron that can be used for machinery or can be used for railroads and so on. There's also rivers and harbors. A lot of rivers in Britain are navigable. In other words, you can put ships on them, or you can put boats on them, or on barges on them, and transport goods from one place to another. You transport them to a harbor, and from that harbor, then there are sailing ships that can take products all over the world. That large population of workers existed from the enclosure movement, if you remember. People who are looking for jobs, they're going to wander off eventually to cities and work in factories. Also, because of the Glorious Revolution of 1688 that we talked about in the last unit, the British have a highly developed banking system. Banks are critical for business. They're critical for providing the capital or the resources that people need in order to buy a factory, build a factory, run a factory, and so on. And so that comes over in 1688 with the new king, William of Orange, a Dutch guy. The Dutch had banks going back a few hundred years before this period of time. They bring that banking idea over, and it helps out the British and English economy quite a bit. There's also quite a bit of political stability from 1688 on with the Glorious Revolution, because that constitutional monarchy with the Bill of Rights that's set up has a sharing of power between the kings and queens and Parliament. And the people sitting in Parliament are very aware of the laws that they need to pass in order to make the economy run smoothly. They don't have a kind of wacky king who's spending all of their money on just wars. You know, that sharing of power, the checks and balances of the constitutional monarchy works out well for big business and wealthy people who are helping make those pro-business laws. Well, the textile industry is really the first major industry that gets affected by industrialization. The boom in population meant that there were many more people who wanted to, well, they had to wear clothes. And so that's what textiles are. They're clothes, essentially. And so there is a huge demand for clothing in Britain, and then multiple outfits or lots of pants and shirts and socks and underwear and those sorts of things. And so that demand for cloth encouraged technical innovation, encouraged the production of machines that would make textile production faster. And textile production is basically based on two things. One of them is spinning. You can take wool from a sheep, or you can take cotton from the cotton plant, and you spin it. You know, you twist it into a kind of yarn or thread, and then you take that yarn and thread and you weave it into cloth, and that cloth then gets cut and sewn into clothing. Well, the thing that was the revolution of spinning is this device called the spinning jenny. It is something that you crank, and as you crank that, you feed it, I guess you feed it the wool or you feed it the cotton, and then you crank on this crank, and it creates spindles of thread or spindles of yarn. Those yarns, those spindles of yarn then are hooked up to a weaving device like the flying shuttle. Looks somewhat like what you see there on the left. You have a bunch of threads going up and down, and then you're weaving a thread horizontally to create cloth. Another invention from this period of time is the cotton engine, or the cotton gin. You might have heard of this. This is something that gets developed in the late 1700s. It simply separates cotton seed from the cotton fluff. Previously, sadly, slaves were doing this work, and you can imagine picking little seeds out of cotton ball kind of thing is really pretty aggravating work and painstaking to do. If you have a machine that does it, and this cotton gin does that, once again, it's kind of a crank machine, then they're going to be able to sort of clean all of this cotton so much faster from its seeds, and then you just have this cotton that gets used in spinning and weaving as well. So you kind of had all those things going on to improve the textile industry. The first factories were created in, let's say, the 1700s, early 1800s, and they're created with with the idea of putting those technical innovations, the spinning jenny, the flying shuttle in them, and maybe not having them cranked by human beings, but maybe have them turned by or fueled by a water mill or a water wheel, or eventually, as I said, a steam engine. And so steam engines and these new machines basically make the creation of a factory very efficient and a very wise decision. It's replacing people in cottages in the countryside who might have had a spinning wheel or some sort of weaving device, or were just weaving by hand. It's going to just make everything much more efficient, as I said. And they're going to hire people to work in these factories. Previously, they were kind of paying people by the piece. How many yards of cotton cloth could you produce, and then you would be paid for that. Now, because they have machines and power sources, factories are paying people based on time. And that really revolutionizes the way people work. You have then overseers or managers who are constantly monitoring the employees and making them clock in at a certain time and clock out at a certain time, and trying to get every single second of efficiency out of every worker. It's really a completely different way of working than before, and it's really very, very difficult for people who weren't used to working like that. Transportation was revolutionized as well because you had the creation of the steam engine. Watt's steam engine is what that is. James Watt is the person who creates that. And it allows for much faster transportation, much more reliable transportation with the steamboat, for example. They also start to create a lot of roads. There's really not much that's going on those roads other than just people traveling. But having a road connecting cities is a wonderful way, always has been, of being able to communicate better, and then also sell products from one place to another much better. Locomotives and railroads are something that really revolutionizes road transportation or transportation from place to place. You know what steam locomotives look like, I think, and you can imagine how the expansion of the railways really improves the efficiency and the transportation times of crops or products going from place to place. It really just revolutionizes the way that people are living. People too could travel much faster than they had been able to before, so that is an additional bonus or benefit to the steam engine on water or on land. The early effects of industrialization are not good. Urbanization happens, and urban simply means city, and so this is people moving to the city. The cities themselves exploding in population, exploding in size, like had never been seen before. And the first wave of this is really quite unplanned, as you'll see when we do an urbanization simulation. All these people are moving to the city. They are living in cramped and crowded places, and working in cramped and crowded places. Lots of lack of hygiene or cleanliness. The air is dirty, the water is dirty, the streets are dirty, they don't have adequate sewage systems. It's really just at the very beginning of urbanization. The cities are terrible places to live, but they're making somebody a lot of money. And so this is something that a lot of people are moving to. There start to be some class tensions between the people who are making money off of the industrial system, the factory owners basically, and the big businessmen, the bankers, and some of those government officials, and the huge working class population, people who are not well clothed, not well fed, working like crazy. 70 hours of work a week is pretty normal for people. And so a lot of tension as those poor people wonder why these so-called middle class people are doing so much better than them, or why those middle class people are profiting off of the work of this working class. So that's a definite tension, and a cause of industrialization is this tension between middle class people and working class people. over time, things do get better for the working class. There are over time ideas of how to improve the lives of working class people. Sometimes the government steps in and creates laws to reduce the number of hours that people work, or improve safety in various workplaces, or sometimes require, not very often, but sometimes require a kind of minimum wage. Usually things just get better over time because the workers themselves are demanding more, and the owner class is negotiating with the workers and having their lives become better. A lot of the time, products and food are getting cheaper because of the efficiency of both farming and factory made products, and so people can afford more things. So over time, things start to get better, and everyone starts to have a higher standard of living. A number of wealthy people will eventually want to move out into the suburbs in many places. Some of that happens in the 20th century, but there is kind of a spreading out of the city into maybe nicer parts of the city, and oftentimes the inner part of the city is still filled with working class people and factories, and really not quite so nice. But over time, people start to improve their housing. It gets less crowded in the city. Their diets improve. As I said, products were cheaper. Clothing, of course, is cheap from industrialization as well. And so there's just kind of an overall improvement. There's also, though, a lot of black coal smoke that gets sent out into the atmosphere, and hurts a lot of people, and hurts the environment. Rivers, waterways are oftentimes polluted with raw sewage or the products of industrial waste from the factories, like dyes and so on. So there's really quite a bit of environmental damage that happens because of the Industrial Revolution. Eventually, though, the Industrial Revolution will spread from England to parts of Europe, and it looks just exactly the same in parts of Europe, with urbanization and rich people getting richer and poor people getting poorer at first. It also spreads to North America. We have an Industrial Revolution that happens more or less after our Civil War, and in America, and same process. At first it's pretty grim. People are moving to the cities, and the cities are teeming with with a lot of people, and there's a lot of disease and unhappy people. But eventually, as I said, improved everything. Well, in the industrialized world, which is Europe and North America, you have generally pretty good conditions for people over time. You have a lot of very wealthy people who profited off of industrialization. You have a number of working class people who are doing okay as well. If you look at the rest of the world, the places that hadn't experienced industrialization, you just find a lot of people who are not having improved lives over time. And we'll talk about those areas of the world later on in this unit, and then also in future units as well. But there is a kind of rise of global inequality, where if you have an industrialized country, that country is really rather wealthy overall, and people have better lives than in places where you don't have the, the Industrial Revolution having taken place. Well, I hope that you were able to get all of your EQs for today. I'd like you to go ahead and take the lecture quiz or lecture check. And if you have any questions, just contact me. Thanks so much. Have a nice day.